Hello, and welcome to Toronto Bible Study. I'm your host, Mike Sampat, and I'm here to talk to you today about this guy. He's a friend of mine, actually. Well, I mean, we know each other, you know. He went to school with me, but he's making videos now, and he made a certain video that I disagree with, so I'm going to discuss it here. You know, I've actually tried to contact him, like, on YouTube, like, you know, because, like, in the comments. But he doesn't seem to be getting back to me about this one. And so I just want to discuss it here and try to be kind as I can. But I do think he's quite wrong. And not only is he quite wrong, but he's actually being a little bit deceptive in the way he's making his arguments here. So I'm going to point this out. And I'm not trying to say he's a bad person or anything, but I do think a lot of these scholars and a lot of these, you know, I guess we could call him like a neo-evangelical or something like that. I don't know. I just think they're basically liberals. You know, he'll never admit that he's a liberal, but they basically are. You know, they believe everything liberals believe, except that they don't admit that they're liberals. And maybe that, I don't know. So anyway, let's just talk about this. He's basically talking about why he doesn't recommend the King James Bible. And of course, for anyone who is a fan of the King James, they've heard this one before many times, I'm sure. But I just want to point out some of the mistakes he's making here, and so you can avoid when the people try to convince you that these things are true. You'll know why they aren't. Hopefully, you know. Anyway, sorry, I'm just trying to fix my... because it doesn't really look good the way I have it here. Okay, I hope this will look good for when you guys get it. Anyway, let's listen to him.
I love the King James Version of the Bible.
His name is Wesley Huff. Wes Huff. Okay. And I actually responded to him before. You can see it here. That's me, obviously. Michael Sampat. That's my actual... because I didn't put it as Toronto Bible Study because I think he wouldn't know who I am. So I put it this one. He knows we used to go to school together, but... so I put my answer. You can read it later or whatever. Then he didn't respond to me. This is 2 months ago. Then some lady came. She agreed with me. She's like, oh, thanks. Then he finally responded to me. He's like, oh, okay, now I have to respond to Mike. And so he put this thing. Which is just, I mean, it kind of shows that he doesn't really look carefully into these things. Because this is just like a talking point that was developed. I think this one was brought up by this guy, James White, who's another anti-KJV guy. Or he wrote the book on why you shouldn't read the King James anymore, or why it's not so great or whatever, you know. Or they think it's a good translation, but it's not. It's nothing special, and you should just consider it as one among the many versions that you can choose from. King James, ESV, or other versions, NIV, etc. Right? But what I'm saying, and people like me, we're saying no. Those ones are bad. They're basically from the devil, and the King James is from God. Okay, we're called King James onlyists or something like that. KJVO they call it sometimes. So I respond to that his arguments here, and then he never responds to me, and then I respond again. Or I put another thing because that's the thing. I noticed something else in his video. I was like, well, asking about that. He's still not responding. So now I'm going to make this video. And let's see what he does. Or he's probably going to ignore that too. Nobody even cares about my videos anyways. So it doesn't matter, right? But like, whatever.
I love it because it's beautiful, because it has been a translation of the Bible that has edified millions of Christians around the world for literally hundreds of years. Most of the Bible verses I memorized as a child come out in KJV English. In fact, when I recite Psalm 23, the Lord's Prayer, or Hebrews 12, they come out of my mouth in the King James. Now, that might not be what you'd have expected if you saw the title of this video. Why, if I grew up on and loved the King James Version, would I then make a video with a title that says that I don't recommend it?
Actually, that's what they all say. Because all the guys, pretty much all of the people who are now scholars, they grew up on the King James because just maybe even 50 years ago, or not even, I don't know, he's like probably in his 30s or something. So let's say even 20 years ago, a lot of people were still using the King James. Up to now, it's most people probably still use the King James. The majority of Christians who read English probably still use the King James. Last time I saw there was a survey done by, I believe it was Indiana Pace University, that showed that 55% of American Christians still use the King James. And that was just done maybe 10 years ago. So it's, although these new versions have been out for a long time now, the King James is still the one that most people prefer. And even what's the reason why these others are so popular? A lot of it's because the denominations push them. So any of the mainline denominations, they'll use another version. They do not use the King James anymore. So if you go to any of the mainline denominations, when you go to church, they're going to give you that one, and they're teaching people from that one. So that provides the impetus, that promotes these other Bibles, right? But generally, if people were just left to their own devices, they would just choose the King James because that is the natural choice. It's just the Bible everyone's comfortable with. It's kind of the one that spread Christianity around the world, or in the era when Christianity was being spread around the world. It was the King James that was the guiding Bible for that. And also, it was just sort of the standard for so many centuries. So that's why. But anyway, now they try to say that these other ones are better, more popular. Better. They're not more popular, certainly not, and they are not better either. But we'll talk about that.
Let me help explain a few things. My academic study has a number of crossover disciplines, one of which is called textual criticism. Textual criticism is not criticizing the text, but rather the study of the original text of an ancient document, in this case the Bible, and comparing the manuscripts, those handwritten documents that have survived until today, to find the mistakes that were made by copyists, scribes, in the text as they copied, whether intentionally or unintentionally. The goal of
that's a poor definition, because it says the study of the original texts, but of course we don't have the original text. So there's no ability to study the original text. What the text critics do is study the surviving manuscripts, as it says a little bit later. They take those manuscripts that have survived and compare them for differences, what they call textual variants. And then they try to figure out, okay, which one is the original? Which one, of all these different versions that we have that have survived in the manuscripts, which one would the original have said? That's a speculation that they make, because we don't have the originals and we have no way of proving what was the original words that were written there. There's no way to do it. It's an art as much as it is a science. Okay, and it's not a science. It's not like a science. It's not an exact science. It's based on probabilities, and it seems more likely that this is the correct reading. It seems more likely that this one is correct. You understand? They can never prove it because they just don't have the original. There's no way to determine what the original actually said. Okay?
The text as they copied, whether intentionally or unintentionally. The goal of biblical textual criticism, then, is to examine these ancient handwritten copies for the purpose of determining the exact wording of what the original looked like. When I started to get serious about my study and I learned about the Greek and Hebrew text that sat behind the text of the Bible, I started to realize that there were some issues, minor issues granted, but issues nonetheless with the text that sat behind the KJV. Now,
so that's a claim that's a claim that they make. Okay, the modern secular scholars, and or he's not. I mean, he wouldn't call himself a secular scholar, but they have this secular mentality where they think that just appealing to the idea that God has guided the text of the Bible and guided its dissemination and its reproduction and its even its translation, those ideas and the canonization as well, those ideas are kind of, you can't really appeal to those ideas in the arguments of scholars. They don't allow you to say, oh, God guided the text. God wanted us to have a perfect Bible, and so he guided it throughout human history and even through the translation process until we have the King James. That's the argument of many KJVO people such as myself. Okay, but that's simply not, you're simply not allowed to make that argument in academia, you know, or it's not really considered. You'd be allowed to make it, I guess, but it wouldn't be well regarded, and most journals won't publish you if you talk like that, and you know, it's considered to be sort of, it's just not, it's not considered a valid argument, you know.
Oh, these issues wouldn't lead you to.
They always go to a naturalistic argument, so it has to be done, like you have to make your argument through okay, like human history and using human reason and using evidence that we have about what happened to the text and what might have happened. It's just all theory though, right? And no way to prove it. No theory that they have about text criticism is testable. You cannot go and test any theory you have about why this text is better than that text. It's just a matter of speculation and probabilities again, and it's all assumptions.
To any different. Were some issues, minor issues granted, but issues nonetheless with the text that sat behind the KJV. Now, these issues wouldn't lead you to come to any different conclusions theologically or doctrinally about the content of.
See, that's another thing they say. Oh, it's not going to change the theology at all. Now, that, it has huge effects on the theology, okay? And just the main effect, the one effect that it has on the theology, just by that assumption, that God did not guide the Bible throughout history. That God created the Bible. What their idea is that God created the Bible perfectly, without error, in the original writings. You know, when Paul wrote the letter to the Corinthians, that was perfect in the Greek. It was perfect. No error, no nothing, okay? But then God just allowed history to just have its way with the text, and randomly things would be changed, different scribes would come in and change things, and God just allowed that because he's a watchmaker God. It's kind of like deism, where they think God is just, he creates everything perfectly and then he allows it to just go, and he doesn't touch it at all. And it's just sort of he's created this perfect watch, and he just allows the watch to run now according to the principles of how a watch works. And in deism they call that, they say that he's created the universe, and then he lets it go. So now it's just by the natural forces, which are completely random, and he doesn't guide the universe in any way anymore. And so that's deism. That's usually a view that's rejected by Christians, although nowadays that's become more and more popular with the rise of theistic evolution, or the idea that God made evolution happen. A lot of Christians appeal to that idea. And when it comes to the Bible now, it's similar. Like they're saying that he made it perfectly in the original, and then he just let it go. And whatever people decide to do with the Bible now is up to people. So if some person decides to add in a whole story into the book of John, like John chapter 8, the story of the adulterous woman, if some scribe just added that in, that was just, God allowed that. God allowed some guy to, add in a bunch of lines at the end of the Gospel of Mark and those kind of things. And then now they think that they can figure those things out based on text criticism, and that they can use their reason and use their science of text criticism to figure out and trace it back and determine the original words of the Bible. And that's better than the King James or any other version that tries to, that tries to do it based on kind of a faith-based idea. But they're wrong.
Or the teaching of the Bible. But there were some places that look slightly different in modern translations done in 2022 than they do
so this one, okay, so I remember we actually got into a debate when I knew this guy in school, and we talked about this passage, and I didn't even know what he was talking about when he brought it up. But at that time, I mean, I was kind of a new Christian. I was just only a few years in, and I hadn't even read the whole Bible, I think, at that point. I probably hadn't read this one. But anyway, so this is 1 Chronicles 26:18. It says, at Parbar westward, 4 at the causeway, and 2 at Parbar. So this is a word in Hebrew, parvar, or something along those lines. It sounds like that, parvar, and so the King James just left it this way in this one. In another place, they translate it as suburb, and I guess the ESV has given the word colonnade. For the colonnade on the west, there were 4 at the road and 2 at the colonnade. I don't know. Is that more understandable? I don't know why. What does colonnade mean? And if you look at this whole passage, if you look at this whole passage, it's even more confusing. Let me just look that up. Sorry, I haven't just seen this video for a minute, so that's why I don't. I hope you can see that. Sometimes when I bring these things up, it doesn't work. So if you look at this 1 Chronicles 26:18, was it? Okay. 1 Chronicles 26:18 at Parbar. So this is the word. Parvar. Parvar. I don't know. But anyway, that's the word in Hebrew. And the definition here in Strong's dictionary is Parvar, a quarter of Jerusalem. So a quarter, like how in Paris they have the Latin Quarter, and they have different quarters of the city, right? Like a little section of the city, right? And here they actually say a suburb, and in another part of the King James they say suburb too. I think it's in 1 Kings. But I won't go into that. But the point is, what I was gonna show you here is how complex this passage is anyway. Sorry, 26:18. So, yeah, this is it, right? 26:18. But if you just look at this whole section, it's talking about they cast the lots to see who would get what section, or something like that, like. These people got this section and these people got that section, kind of thing, right? So they're casting the lot eastward fell to Shelemiah. Then for Zechariah, his son, a wise counselor, they cast lots, and his lot came out northward. To Obed-Edom, southward, and to his sons, the house of Asupim. To Shupim and Hosa, the lot came forth westward, with the gate Shaleketh by the causeway of the going up ward against ward. Eastward were 6 Levites, northward 4 a day, and southward 4 a day, and toward Asupim 2 and 2. At Parbar westward for the causeway 2 at the Parbar. Look, I don't know who thinks that they're gonna read this in the English Standard Version, and understand that better, but it doesn't matter what language you read that in or what version you read that in. You're going to have to be looking up things. Who are these? What are those names? Who are they talking about? What is this place? What does this mean? So you're one way or another, you're in your Bible dictionary looking up stuff when you read this passage, okay? I don't care who you are. I don't care if you have a PhD. If you have a PhD in biblical studies, maybe then you can get through this without looking stuff up. Or if you're an expert on the book of Chronicles, then maybe you understand that. But otherwise, it doesn't matter who you are. You're going to start looking stuff up here. You can't just figure this out, this passage, just by reading it. All right? In any Bible, any translation. Okay? So that's the thing. So just the idea that you're going to read this in some other Bible and just fully understand it is simply not the case. Even if you just look at what he has here. In the ESV, and for the colonnade on the west, there were 4 at the road and 2 at the colonnade. What is that? What's a colonnade? What is that? The King James, in another place, they translate Parbar as a suburb. So is a colonnade a suburb? What is a colonnade? What does that mean? And again, if you look at the ESV, if you look at all those other verses surrounding this one in the ESV, you're gonna still get all those confusing names and words. And who is Sheleketh? What is that? What is this Sheleketh? I don't even know what that is. Okay, so this the idea that this is somehow just easy to understand and a person can just pick this up and understand it, and that's why the KJV is not as good. That's not true. Okay, it doesn't matter who you are or what version you use. You will need a Bible dictionary to understand that passage. Okay, but what I'm saying is the King James is correct, and whereas colonnade is going to be confusing and probably is wrong. I don't even know what a colonnade is. The King James is correct. The Parbar, when you look up Parbar in a Bible dictionary, it says suburb. And if you see that the King James has translated the same word as suburb in another place, then you'll know that means a suburb. And so that's the correct understanding. But what they're saying colonnade, that's, who even knows what that means, So it's not true that this is somehow clarifying it. It's not clarifying anything.
In the King James done in 1611. Nonetheless, the primary reason why I don't recommend the KJV to the average
what did he say?
Translate the teaching of the Bible, but there were some places that looked slightly different in modern translations done in 2022 than they do in the King James done in 1611. Nonetheless, the primary reason why I don't recommend the KJV to the average person isn't necessarily because of the issues regarding textual criticism and the text that lies behind the translation.
So what was that even a text criticism problem when he showed the colonnade thing? Or when he showed first Chronicles 26:18, is that a text criticism problem? Why is he even showing that? That's more of a translational thing where people would say, oh, it's hard to understand what that means, parvar. It's not like somebody's gonna say that's not a text criticism problem. I don't know why he even brought that up, but anyway, okay.
That is important, don't get me wrong, but textual criticism is one of the most complex and demanding academic fields there is, and so I can't really fault lay Christians for not understanding its sometimes convoluted complexities.
So this is the thing. So what he's saying here is that the text criticism clearly rules out the King James. Clearly. And that's too complicated for uneducated Christians, so that they, if they don't understand that stuff. And so it's as if, okay, the only reason people pick the King James is because they don't understand text criticism. Well, no. You don't have to understand text criticism. It's not some exact science where they're figuring out all this stuff perfectly. Text criticism is more of an art than a science, It's a lot of, and also from a text criticism perspective, the King James is actually pretty defensible. You know? But they don't tell you that because they don't have, it's just the secular academy is always biased against those ideas. But actually the King James is very defensible even from their secular text critical perspective. But the important reason is theological, where we are theists. We are not deists. We don't believe that God just creates something, starts the ball rolling, and then just lets it go, lets the random forces of history or the random natural forces work, and he never touches it. No, we believe that God controls history, controls the history, including the history of the Bible, especially His Word. And so, His Word, which is perfect when He made it, is going to remain perfect and even become more perfect. If you understand the biblical understanding of the word perfect, it's a little bit different, but it increases, it becomes even better, it becomes more refined and better over time. And that's what we have with the King James. Even the King James has undergone certain changes that have improved it. But it's always just, that's what scholars should work on, is improving the King James, not trying to create new translations from scratch, because they just create more confusion.
Unless someone can read the Greek or the Hebrew and has the comprehension and time to sit down with me and examine some of these things, I'm only going to truly get so far.
So if you don't speak Greek and Hebrew, you're not even part of this conversation. You can't even understand my advanced knowledge of these things, so you don't even appreciate why. But for all the rest of you, for all of you noobs who don't understand these things, now let me explain these simple reasons why you should reject the King James. So it gives you this impression that, okay, not only does he have reasons without the Greek and Hebrew, but for all you noobs who don't know Greek and Hebrew, well, there's a million reasons. You just don't even get it. You're just not educated enough. Okay? And that's a bad argument too. I mean, if there were valid reasons from text criticism to completely dismiss the possibility that the King James is superior, then he should be able to give it to you, whether you understand text criticism or not, whether you speak Greek or Hebrew or not. He can explain it in simplified language, just explain the concepts of why, but he doesn't do that because it's not true. Now he's going to move on to why, okay, outside of text criticism, why should we reject the King James, or why should we read other versions instead? Let's talk about it.
Very well might be a time and a place for those kinds of details. But if I don't have that time or that place, I think there's another just as valid reason why I shouldn't recommend the KJV to people. So, what is it? Well, in 1 Corinthians 14, it says that if you do not speak intelligibly, how will anyone know what is being said? For you will be speaking into the air.
Okay, that's kind of taking a Bible verse out of context and using it in another context where it doesn't apply, which is something that these scholars should be teaching people not to do. And generally, that's a very bad way of using the Bible. Like when you take a verse out of context. See, what Paul's talking about there is when the people are speaking in tongues in Corinth, and then they're speaking in a language that they don't know themselves and that most of the people there don't know either, speaking in some foreign language, like supernaturally, because God used to do that. And so he's saying, look, if you're just speaking some language nobody understands, then no one can understand you. It's useless. Okay? But that's not like what we're talking about here with the King James versus other English Bibles. Everyone speaks English. He's just saying that it needs to be English that's fully understandable in every single word, so that you understand what parvar means, or when they put colonnade instead of parvar in First Chronicles 26:18, that's better somehow, but it's not actually, because as we just said, what is a colonnade? What does that mean? So it's actually making it more confusing. Whereas if you saw parvar, you just say, what is that? You look it up in the Bible dictionary, or you just Google it. You can Google it and you'll see it right away. Let me just show you that. Like what? Parvar. What is that? Let's see what that is. Oh, see how it says first thing is parvar in the Bible. Let's just see what parvar means. Parvar definition of meaning. The first thing is a Bible dictionary. So let's see what it says. Parvar, Bible dictionary, Easton's Bible dictionary. A place apparently connected with the temple. Probably a suburb. As the word is rendered in second Kings 23:11. The word in the King James is rendered as suburb. A space between the temple wall and the wall of the court. An open portico into which the chambers of the official persons opened. See, that's more like a colonnade. See this one? So that's more like what I think of when I hear the word colonnade. But I think most people, when they hear the word colonnade, they have no idea what that means. It doesn't mean a section of the city. It means like some kind of structure or something, a colonnade usually, or some kind of like open place where you can walk or something. I don't know what a colonnade is, but anyway. So that's how you can see that, like, it's very easy to look that up. So that's a better way to find out what that word is than to see colonnade and not know what colonnade is. You look up colonnade. What is a colonnade? I don't even know. Let's see what colonnade is. A row of columns supporting a roof. An entablature, or arcade. A row of trees or other tall objects. So that's what happens when you look up colonnade. Okay, is that more confusing or less? Because most people do not know what colonnade is, or what exactly that means in that context, just right off the bat. So they see colonnade in their ESV. Excuse me. You go look it up. And they see this. Is that helpful? No, it's not. It makes it more confusing. Now they might say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Or maybe they assume that that's right. And so now they think, oh, it's you turn left at the row of the trees or the row of columns. What? What kind of confusing nonsense is that? Then if you actually try to look it further, okay, maybe they'll say, oh wait, I don't know, that's just weird. So then they find out that they look into the Hebrew of it, let's say. That they're more advanced students. They look into the Hebrew and they see it says parvar. So they're like, okay, what is that? And then they look into that. They find out it's parvar might be a suburb, or it might be a section between the temple and the wall. And they're like, now they're even getting more confused. But colonnade is not descriptive of that. Colonnade is actually probably wrong. So why would anybody think colonnade, But it's just, sorry, I just saw a spider. But anyway. So why would anyone say colonnade? It makes no sense to say colonnade, okay? But that's, so they want you to think that that's right, okay.
In other words, edification, instruction, and maturity all require intelligibility. The fact is that the English of the King James Bible 500 years later is no longer fully intelligible.
It's not 500 years, okay? It's 400 years. 1611 is when the King James was published. Now it's 2022. That's 411 years. It's not 500 years. Anyway, whatever. Who cares about that? But look, see, he's not, because they don't even take this seriously. So then they don't prepare themselves properly to make these arguments, and he's never looked into it in depth. They just read a few little things of the king. They read some books by these other guys, and they think that they figured it out. They don't know. They don't know, man.
William Tyndale, an English Bible scholar who taught at the University of Cambridge in the late 15th and early 16th century, lived during a time when it was controversial to read the Bible in anything other than Latin. Seeking to develop a translation of the scriptures in his native tongue, Tyndale famously said that if God would spare his life and that he would be gifted years of long living, his desire would be that the boy who pushes the plow in the field would know more about the Bible than he, a biblical scholar, did. This has always been the goal of...
So that's the goal of biblical translation, or that's kind of the goal of biblical translation. Now, that's kind of an exaggeration, obviously. Okay, I'm pretty sure Tyndale didn't think that the average plowboy was going to know more than the Bible as him. This scholar who's learned both, or he learned Greek very well, and he was learning Hebrew, kind of. Or I guess by the end of his life, he had learned Hebrew, but anyway... He obviously doesn't think that the average plowboy in England was going to know the Bible better than him, but he wanted to create a translation in English so that common people could read it, because most people obviously could not learn Latin, which was the average translation was Latin, and certainly most people could not learn Greek and Hebrew. They had no time. They were working all the time, and they're poor, so he wanted to create one in English so that the average person could read it. But again, most plowboys are not going to be able to read even the Bible that Tyndale wrote, the English translation that he wrote, and he knew that too. He knew that whatever he translated for the word parvar, some plowboy's not going to know that, But he's just saying that he just wants to. He's getting the idea out that for the common man to be able to read the Bible, it must be in English, and so that's what his goal was, and it's a fine goal. But the idea that we need to create a Bible so that every random person who's not educated at all can just pick it up and understand everything in it, that shouldn't be our goal, because the Bible is an advanced book. And it's advanced in the sense that you do require some advanced study to really fully understand it. It's not going to be just available to every random uneducated person, Now, the random uneducated person can read a King James Bible or these Bibles and understand most of it, but even these new modern translations, they're going to have trouble. They're going to have to look up things. They're going to have these issues. Now, the King James is going to present more problems in that sense because of the Old English, or sort of archaic English, okay? So, in that sense, it may be a little bit more difficult for the average person to read it, the uneducated person. But in many ways, it's actually easier. Because look at the example I just gave you of colonnade. Whether you read colonnade or parvar, you have to look it up. And once you look up colonnade, now it's getting you more confused. It's making it harder to understand. Even when you look it up, you have to further look it up. See how he's trying to make you think that just because they gave you this modern sounding word, that therefore it's easier. No, it's actually making it harder. And that's the case for almost all of their mistranslations that they did. Colonnade is probably even wrong, actually, because what is that? A line of trees, a line of columns? What is that? How does that add up? That doesn't fit. So that's just wrong.
Bible translation to make the Word of God intelligible, understandable, and clear to the average person, that they may learn, study, and grow spiritually and intellectually in it. My point.
Again, like I say, yeah. If average people, uneducated people, want to learn and grow spiritually and intellectually in the Bible, the ESV is making it, just with that example he gave, the ESV is making it harder to grow. It's making it more confusing, okay? So that our whole argument that they're more intelligible is not true. It's simply not true, okay?
Is this, despite whole lists of definitions and explanations that are produced and published, there are still hundreds of dead and obsolete words in the King James. 4 centuries does a lot to a language. You don't have words like besom, chambering, and emerald. You say broom, immorality, and tumor.
Okay, again, is an emerald a tumor? Is that what emerald means? Maybe. If you look up emerald now, you'll see tumor, you'll see boil, you'll see like blister or something like that. You'll see a few options there. And then you can look back at the Bible, at the context, decide for yourself. Or you can maybe ask your pastor, ask a scholar, or read up on it or whatever, okay? But if you read tumor in your new version, you're just going to continue. You're just like, oh, it's a tumor. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean cancer? Does that mean something else? Or so what? Like, you know, it's actually confusing you more. Okay, because the emerald, you don't know exactly what it means, maybe, or maybe you do. I don't know, but most likely you don't. So you have to look it up. And then when you look up emerald, like I was looking up that parvar thing, when you look it up in the Bible dictionary, you'll see a few ideas. But going from emerald to the Bible dictionary is easier than when you read tumor. That's just some translators' interpretation. It might be a tumor. It might mean tumor. It might mean something else, like a boil or something, or like this, or like a abscess. It's not exactly clear what emerald mean. I'm not 100% sure even about that particular word, but you see what I'm saying though, right? Like it's actually easier to just go from the King James word you don't understand to the Bible dictionary and then make your conclusion than to read tumor. If you read tumor, you'll probably just assume tumor. What is tumor? Tumor could be either a benign tumor or a cancerous tumor, right? Or something that most people would think of either one of those two things. And in fact, tumor is the translator's word that they put to approximate emerald or whatever it is originally. I don't even know, right? But it's not necessarily the correct translation. You know, it's their interpretation. I would suggest to you that the King James is the correct translation. The emerald, whatever it is correct. And then when we figure out, we have to kind of figure out still, okay, it doesn't mean the tumor is right. Even if you had looked into the details of what tumor translates, you know, that's also a translational debate there. Okay, but when you're just reading it, you're reading through it, you're not going to even know that there's a debate. You're just going to see tumor, okay, it's a tumor. You just keep reading. You don't even think about there's a debate there, there's something more to investigate here. But with the King James, you're given that. You have that, okay. Oh, it's emerald. What is that? You look it up and you find out there's some discussion here. Scholars are not quite sure what it means, and you know what I mean? So, actually, they've taken away something from you here by giving you this supposedly intelligible translation. They've actually taken away some of the information that you get from the Bible. A besom is a besom a broom? Is that what it is, or is this something similar to a broom? You know, again, if you look it up, maybe it's something else. Is chambering about immorality? Is that what chambering is? You know, he's giving you the impression that that's what that is, and it's very simple, and it's like, there's no other discussion there. But no, there is discussion, and chambering can have other meanings too, and the translators will disagree. But my suggestion to you is that the King James got it right. Chambering is correct. What does chambering mean? Well, that's the discussion we can have now. Okay? But whatever chambering is that we decide what it is, at least we know there's a discussion. If you just read immorality, then you think that's what it means. You don't think that there's a discussion. But there is.
Isn't an objection to hard concepts within the Bible. There are, of course, hard terms, ideas, and notions throughout the Old and the New Testaments. After all, I'm not objecting to difficulties that God clearly meant to put in the Bible. Peter clearly says that there are some things in the scriptures that are hard to understand.
There's some things that are hard to understand in the scriptures. Okay? So, we shouldn't make it even harder to understand by giving these new translations. If you have one standard translation that everyone can work with, then we're all just working with this translation. Okay, so what is emerald? Now we're going to have that discussion. And it's the same discussion for everyone all over the world. But if we have to go through all these other translations and different things, then most of us don't even know that there is a debate there. Most of us are just like, oh, it means tumor. You keep going. Then you might find out from some other guy that, oh, his version doesn't say tumor. His version says blister or something, or some kind of thing like that. And so now you find out that there's a discussion, and it's just confusing. And when he memorizes the passage, it has that word, and when you memorize it, it has this word. And so now you guys are memorizing it, and then when you come to recite it, now it's different. So it's just confusing. It's more and more confusion. They're adding on confusion and making it more difficult to understand, not less. It's more and more difficult as you use these new translations. Okay, there's 50 or more translations. Which one is right? That's confusing. Okay, and then when these guys say, "Oh, there's about 10 of them that are pretty good, and you can just pick which one you want," no. And then at the end of the day, what they're really saying is, pick whichever translation you like out of these. Like, they'll say of the 50, they'll say these 10 are pretty good. So pick one of these. The scholars, they'll recommend, or maybe 5 or something. They'll recommend that these are the best. So you pick one of those. But at the end of the day, it's just a translation. So you really do depend on them. At the end of the day, you depend on scholars to figure out what the Greek and Hebrew really means. So only they really understand the Bible. Only if you speak Greek and Hebrew, both of these ancient dead languages, only if you speak both of them can you truly understand the Bible. And all the people who read English Bibles, well, you're just kind of reading a secondhand Bible. It's not as good. And you can get whatever you get out of it, but at the end of the day, come to us. When you really want to understand the Bible, you come to us. Okay, we're the ones who really understand it, the scholars. And it's just not the case.
My grievances with the recommendation of the KJV are with difficulties God didn't put in the Bible. Difficulties due to the evolution of language itself. And there aren't just dead words, that is, words that we don't use any longer in the English language, but what biblical scholar Mark Ward describes as false friends. Words you don't know, you don't know.
Yeah, false friend. Yeah, Mark Ward. I responded to some of his comments on his page as well, and what he'll do in his channel, his YouTube channel, and he'll do the same thing as Wesley. Like, he'll start to try to debate you, and then when he runs into something that he can't respond to, he just stops debating. It's like, oh, I'm too busy for this. I don't, you're insignificant. But why did you even start to debate me then? Why did you even respond to even one of my comments? So, because once they realize that they just don't have any response anymore, that they really aren't as well, they don't really understand this issue as well as they thought they did, then they run away. Mark Ward does it. Wesley's doing it now with me, because they don't get it. They don't understand. They just think it's some easy thing that they should just easily dismiss. But no, it's not. We're not idiots. We studied these things too. And you're wrong about most of the stuff you're saying, but they just say it. They don't know. But anyway, this is kind of an interesting thing. The false friends. Okay, these are words that, it's like a word that it means something to the old King James English, in their English. And then it's still used in our English, but it means something slightly different. So when you read it, you might think, oh, that's what it means. Or you don't even think of it. You're just like that. You just assume that it's what it means in modern English. But in the King James English, it means something slightly different. You know what I mean? So that's why they call it, Mark Ward calls it a false friend, because he's saying that you think you understand it, but you actually don't understand it, because the King James people were using it in a different way. And that's actually a good point he makes. And it's something that we do have to be aware of. But once again, I think they're over exaggerating the problem. But let's see. Let's hear what he says.
And this is one of my main reasons.
He talks about the word halt, and I think this is a bad example he uses. I think Mark Ward, in his investigation of false friends that he calls them, those kind of words, he's come up with better examples than the one Wesley uses here. But anyway, let's listen to Wes.
We're not recommending the King James Version, because there are words we use today that changed meaning, that meant something completely different to Elizabethans 500 years ago than they do today. And so by reading them, we might be completely misled in our understanding.
So you said the 500 years again, you know? They always like he likes to exaggerate a little bit, just to make it seem a little bit more out of touch or whatever.
Today. And so by reading them, we might be completely misled in our understanding and comprehension of a particular text. We might not even know that we're misunderstanding the King James translators because our lexicon has changed its definitions. Let me give you a simple and hopefully straightforward example of this. In 1 Kings, we get the famous story of Elijah sparring with the kings of Baal. The Israelites are watching on to this competition, and Elijah at 1 Kings 18:20.
Oh yeah, so you see how he said that? Like, he says that Elijah sparring with the kings of Baal, but it was actually the priests of Baal, right? And then he puts it at the bottom in priest, right? So even in your own speech, like even talking, like these things happen. You know, he's talking in English about English translations, and he made that mistake. So these things happen. And just in regular speech, it's like it's not as if anybody can read anything or listen to anyone and assume that they understand everything fully. And you always have to be careful with it, with words, and you know. Anyway, but my point is just that it doesn't mean that just because you have some modern translation that you've got it all figured out. And of course, he'll obviously admit that that's true as well. But he will only admit it once he's established this King James only thing has been disproven. Then he'll admit that modern translations, you're not always getting it right, and some words are wrong. He doesn't talk about how tumor is not necessarily the best translation of emerald, and we don't really know what emerald is necessarily, or there's a debate about it. You know, he doesn't talk about that. So Emrod being a tumor, to say that that's more intelligible and therefore these modern translations are better, that's not correct. It's not correct at all.
1 in the KJV says, "How long halt ye between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people answered him not a word." What does halt mean? And what I mean by that is, what did the original translators in 1611 mean when they chose this particular phrase for it to be understood intelligibly by their initial readers? Now, no one would fault you if you read this and thought it meant stop. After all, we talk about traffic being ground to a halt. You might be thinking of the more old-timey halt. Who goes there? It wouldn't be crazy to think that what Elijah is asking the Israelites is, how long will you stop between this opinion or that opinion? However, if you turn to a modern translation, say an ESV, for example, what you'll see is this: how long will you go limping between two different opinions?
So halt, sometimes when they used the word halt back then, it meant something like that, like you're limping, you're having this difficulty walking, you're having a halting kind of gait, or your steps are halting. So when they say that your steps are halting, they don't mean that your steps, that you stopped walking. They mean that you're kind of limping along, you're not going very quickly, there's something causing you to not walk properly. Okay? So when the King James translated that word from Hebrew, I'm not sure what it is exactly, but let me just see. When the King James translated that, they put They put halt because they meant limp, right? They meant to say limping. Where is it? 1 Kings 18:21. How long halt ye between two opinions? Sorry, it's hard for you to read that. Oh, that's even harder. Pashak. A pasak. Pasak. A primitive root to hop, that is figuratively skip over or spare. By implication, to hesitate. By implication, to hesitate. Look at that. You see that? Also, literally, to limp, to dance, halt, to become lame, leap, or pass over. So, okay, so the ESV put limping. Is limping necessarily the best translation? I don't know. It says here, by implication, to hesitate, which is very similar to what we might think with the word halt. And one thing I pointed out to Wesley in the comments there on his video is that we still use the phrase halting speech. Excuse me. This is a common phrase in English today, that their speech was halting, or you know, they were speaking in a halting manner. And what that means is that they're speaking. They're not stopping their speech. They're speaking, but it's just coming out very slowly, or because they're not, maybe they don't have good English, or they don't speak the language well, so it's halting, but they're still speaking. It's just that they'll stop, and then it's hesitating, as it says, hesitating. All right, so and that's what Elijah's talking about. How long will you hesitate between choosing one opinion or another? How long will you halt? How long halt ye between two opinions? Are you going to choose the God of Israel, or are you going to choose Baal? What are you going to do, Israel? You know, that's what Elijah's saying here. And so the idea of limping between two opinions, that's just even more confusing too. What does that mean? What does that mean? Why ESV should have went with hesitate or something like that. It's basically saying, he's saying, why are you sitting on the fence? Why don't you pick one or the other? And stop trying to go in between. And limping doesn't really, that's not a better translation. It's just like, it's actually, again, it's more confusing. What does that mean? Limping between two opinions. What? If you say hesitate, that's kind of okay. Or halt, yeah. If you understand halt as stopping between two opinions, if you don't have that more nuanced understanding of the word halt, and you think it means stopping between two opinions, that's actually better, because it means you're kind of sitting in between. You're not going fully one way or the other. So that's what Elijah's talking about. He's talking about these fence sitters that won't choose one or the other. They go, sometimes they go this way, sometimes they go that way. Right? So I would say that halt is just a better translation, even if you do have that understanding of just stop. But again, even in modern English, we have this understanding of halting, halt, as meaning more than just stopping. It's also understood to be, limping, or kind of going slowly or hesitatingly through between one or the other, or going hesitatingly. That's what it's understood that way, even in modern English. So no, he's just wrong. I hope you guys can read that. Sometimes when I bring these up, it doesn't work properly, so I hope it'll work this time. Anyway, here we are.
How long will you go limping between two different opinions? If you go to the Hebrew word, it means limp or hop. In fact, if you go to other places where the KJV uses the word halt, you kind of get this indication. The Gospels say that Jesus healed the halt and the blind. Genesis 32:31 says
exactly. That. So you see how you can kind of take the word in another part of the King James and use it to show you what it means here. Jesus healed the halt and the blind. Well, They're talking about people. They're halt. They have trouble walking. It's not that they're completely stopped. It's that they have trouble walking. They have some kind of disability.
Has healed the halt and the blind. Genesis 32:31 says that when Jacob wrestled with the Lord, he emerged halting upon his thigh.
Yeah,
Back in
because the Lord had messed up his thigh or something like that. His joint was out of place after they wrestled. So then he's walking, he's halting, he's limping. That's what it means, right? And so you could piece that together. And nowadays we have all these search tools, and we can find where's this word halt in English, you know, in the KJV, and what are they talking about, you know? But if you I mean, it's just anyway. All I'm saying is, look, these new translations are not making it easier; they're making it harder in many ways. You know, you could easily, if you have the King James, you could easily Google or whatever. You could do your search thing, find the other occurrences of the word halt, or whatever word they're translating there, and then you'll find out what it means. You'll just figure it out. But if you think that, if you read it in the ESV, limping between two opinions, you're like, what? Limping between two opinions. That's weird. That's confusing. That doesn't even make any sense, you know?
In 11, in a King James context, halt meant to limp. Today, in the context like that, we don't expect that meaning. It's not that the King James translated.
Like, it doesn't mean to limp. It means or it can mean to limp. But what it means is that hesitation, that you're hesitatingly walking. Right? So it would have been good to say hesitating between two opinions. But halting is good because it's either understood as that sort of hesitating walk, or it's understood as completely stopping. If you don't understand fully nowadays, they might say halt, like halt, who goes there? And so it means stop, right? So then if you're stopping between two opinions, then that's what he's talking about. Why don't you choose one or the other? So maybe that's, you know, if you just read it through, and you understood it that way, that would be a good translation. It's a good understanding of it. If you want to look more closely into it and you find out more about what halt means, that's also good. It's better than limping. Limping along between two opinions, it's like, what does that even mean, you know? But, you know, it's kind of like literal, I guess, or whatever.
Were somehow wrong or misguided in their word choices when it comes to words like halt. They couldn't predict the future of the English language, even if their translation choices may have shaped the future of English to a large degree. Your Bible has changed. It's simply a reality. It hasn't changed in terms of corruption, like many skeptics may assert, but it has changed in terms of clarity. Take, for example...
They do corrupt it, you know? But I'll talk about that.
This graphic I made of the 23rd Psalm in English versions throughout their history. Words evolve. Some phrases die out entirely, and others, like halt, change their meaning over time.
Yeah, like,
this is the
look at this
words
one,
like halt.
So obviously nobody understands what Old English. I don't know if I guess they did have an Old English Bible. Anyway, so then there was Middle English. Our Lord governeth me, and nothing shall fail in me. That is kind of crazy, but anyway, the Lord is my. Look at King James, between King James and Modern English. Okay, the Lord is my shepherd; I shall not want. And then this is the one that usually they'll say, because the Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. Because the word is wants. The word that they gave is wants. Here, it's not that you shall not want, you shall not desire anything, right? It's that you should not want for anything, that you don't need anything. Everything that you need, He is provided. The Lord will provide, okay? But even in modern English, again, people know what that word want is, a nuanced. There's other nuances to the word, but you can understand it And so I shall not want. The idea that if a person reads that and thinks I shall not want anything, I'll never desire anything, as if that's what that means. That would be a very simplistic and obviously incorrect understanding of it. I think, anyone who thinks about this passage deeply, if you're not a little kid, will understand that that's not what he means. And also, the word want, even in modern English, people know what that means. I do not want for anything. That phrase is still used to this day. And so, yeah, there's no need for that. And then he's like, okay, he maketh me lie down in green pastures. So the 1611, okay, it had an E here at the end of green, the word green, because some words at that time, he puts two E's here for me just to make it more confusing. Like no King James says this. Okay, because back when they wrote the King James in 1611, there was still some words in English which had not been, the spelling had not been standardized. And part of the reason English became standardized is because of the King James. But in later editions of the King James, they corrected these things, these misspellings, you may call it. The green without the E at the end, me with only one E. And so those things were changed, though. You're not going to read a King James that writes it like that today. Even if it is the 1611 edition, they'll take out those things. Some people will you can buy a 1611 King James, and what it does is that it makes, there's some other changes that were made by editions later that are slightly different. So they take those, they leave those in, but with those things, like taking the E off the green, they'll take those out. They don't leave those in. So that just makes it seem more confusing than a King James really is. It's not.
Their meaning over time. This is the natural course of linguistics and language development. The danger is that there might be words in the KJV that you don't know. And the King James translators themselves say as much in their preface to the original 1611 printing.
See, this is the part, and I asked him about this in the comments. This is why I'm making this video, because I asked him about this in the comments, and he doesn't respond. This is like, look, there's this preface the translators wrote, and of course they're writing in 1600, 1611. Their English is very different than ours. It's not an easy read, this preface that they wrote, okay? And many of the people, the defenders of modern versions, will refer to that preface and say, oh, well, look, the King James translators, even they knew that different translations are all good, and so you could continue and make more, but they don't talk like that. But because they know that most people are not going to be able to really read that thing, it's very difficult to read. Okay, if you're not a bit educated, it's very difficult to read that thing. All right. Even for people who are educated, it's very difficult to read. Don't get me wrong. But he's going to say this. So they refer to that, and they'll say, oh, the translators, even the translators of the King James, that even they wanted to, or even they felt like new translations would come along and they'd be better, but they don't feel that way. But anyway, listen to what he says. So this is what he's saying. The King James translators wrote in their preface.
In the preface, titled The Translators to the Reader, they state that language changes, and as it does, the English Bible will need to be updated as such.
They state, this is what he said, that they state that language changes, and as it does, the translation will need to be updated as such. Now, I don't remember that when I read that thing. It's been a few years now, but we can look it up. I'll show you one thing that they did write. KJV translators preface. So I know one thing that they did right here. Um, sorry. Okay, yeah. So in this part here, look what it says. Truly good Christian reader, we never thought from the beginning that we should need to make a new translation, nor yet to make of a bad one a good one. For then the imputation of Sixtus had been true in some sort, that our people had been fed with gall of dragons instead of wine, with whey instead of milk. Because they're saying that there's other English translations out before when they were making this, and they're saying, look, we're not trying to say that we're going to make a new translation. We're not making a new one. We're taking those other ones like Tyndale's. He talked about Tyndale's and others like there were some others like Geneva and others, right? They took those, and they took them and they made and they're taking them. They're making a better one. Okay, they're not saying that those were bad, and they're not trying to come up with a brand new one either. Okay, they're saying those ones are good. Those are also the Word of God. The Tyndale Bible, the Geneva Bible, the Bishop's Bible. Those are also the Word of God. But we're taking those, and our mark is to make. See, they weren't trying to make a new one. They weren't trying to make out of bad ones a good one, but to make a good one better, or out of many good ones, one principal good one. So they're taking all those other good ones, and they're making one principal good one. Okay, the really good one, the perfect one. And it says, not justly to be accepted against. That has been our endeavor, that our mark. So that's been their goal all along. Their goal has been to make one out of many good ones, one principal good one, and that one not justly to be accepted against. What does that mean? It means that the one they're going to making out of all these, they're going to make one which is not to be accepted against. They're not saying that you could just as language evolves making more ones. No. They're not saying that at all. They're saying this one that we're making now is going to be perfect. Don't make any changes. That's what they're saying. Not to be accepted against. Or not justly anyway. So you see? Now that's what I recall from reading this. And I don't remember them saying whatever he said. I don't know what he said there. That's like, to me, that's just being very deceptive. He doesn't show you the quotes. See how I just showed you the quote, even though it's in Old English or whatever, and we talk about it. You may say that you may disagree with me about what that means. Or you can go look up the King James translation now, or the translator's preface, and read it yourself, and maybe you have a different interpretation of what they said. I just gave you a little quote. Maybe that's not what they mean in context, so you can debate me or whatever. But he doesn't do that. He just tells you something that they supposedly said, which actually, that seems to directly contradict what I just read you. Okay, because let's just hear what he says again.
There's the out entirely. This is the natural course of words in the KJV that you don't know, their preface to the original 1611 printing. In the preface, titled The Translators to the Reader, they state that language changes, and as it does, the English Bible will need to be updated as such.
So they state that language changes, and as it does, the Bible will need to be updated as such. Where do they say that, Wes? Where do they say that? That's what I asked him. He doesn't respond to me in the comments, you know. And so this is very bad. This is not good, you know. But this is what scholars do. They assume that everyone's so stupid that they can't read that thing, or that we're just never gonna look it up. That we're just gonna believe this guy. Most people, I'm not saying they're all stupid, but most people just trust this guy. Because they're like, yeah, you know, he's a scholar, he's a Christian, probably everything he's saying is true, or we could just rely on him, and trust him. And unfortunately, I'm not saying he's a bad guy or he's like some wicked, evil person, but he's not being honest here. He's not being fully honest. As far as I can tell, I don't recall them saying anything like that, Wes. And if you know better than me, then please offer up the quote and show me the exact quote, and we can read it in their old English and debate what they exactly mean. But I just showed you that they said that they created a Bible that is not justly to be accepted against. That is, you don't come along and just say that this Bible's wrong and they should have been said this way. No. They're saying that they made one. That was their philosophy, that they made one that's... They're taking good Bibles and making a perfect Bible. And what he's trying to do is say that... Because they're not... Again, the other thing that they said in that was that they're not trying to make a new translation. They take those old ones and build on those old ones. They built on the Tyndale. They built on the Bishop's Bible. They used the work of previous translators to create this one Bible that's the best. And since then, the King James has undergone additions, and then what they've done is taken this good Bible that those men made, the translators, and just making it better, refining it, and making it more readable again, and other slight improvements like fixing the spellings and those things. Okay, but what he's trying to say is that the translators somehow supported making a brand new translation, because that's what people do now. They don't try to build off those other ones. They might consult them, but they're what they do now with these modern translations is they make a brand new translation straight from the Greek and Hebrew without really depending on those previous translations such as the King James. And it's a totally different type of work. It's a totally different translational task, or translational endeavor. It's not quite the same as what the King James people were talking about. So he's really quite egregiously misrepresented the King James translators here, and it's actually embarrassing. It's embarrassing, but these scholars do this all the time, especially in biblical scholarship. Unfortunately, all the scholars, in my opinion, nowadays are quite compromised, and scholarship in general has taken a huge downturn, especially since the days of the translators of the King James. But you really do see it in the biblical translations and biblical scholarship. I mean, it's really quite atrocious the way they do this kind of thing. And this what he's doing right now is very bad. It's not good. He's misrepresenting them, what they said there. Okay, it's very bad. We rely on scholars to explain these things to us because they're difficult to understand. It's hard to read the translation. You have to be pretty well educated just to read that thing. And so we rely on people like this to explain it to us, less educated Christians. But he's not doing that. He's misrepresenting it. And that's very, very bad because he has an agenda. He has an agenda to support modern Bibles and to put down the King James. And maybe I have an agenda too. I support the King James, so I'm not pretending I don't have an agenda here. But I am showing you exactly what the translators said. I'm showing you their exact words, and I'm giving you kind of what it means. You can decide for yourself whether I'm right or not, or you can go read that thing for yourself. But he's not properly showing you where does it say that in that writing. What exactly does it say in the writing there? He's giving you some weird kind of thing. If they even said anything related to what he's saying here, it's not like that. It says it in their old English, and it's not gonna, he's not. I don't know. Anyway.
When you read the Bible, you should be able to understand what it means. This is what Bible translators strive for today, and this is what the KJV translators wanted at the beginning of the 17th century.
They wanted people to understand, but they also understood that regardless of what they do and how well they translate it, that some things are going to be beyond the grasp of many readers. there's just some words you just never knew, especially some of those when they're referring to those old place names and like those old people groups that you never heard of, like the Jebusites and all this stuff. You don't know who. Nobody knows what the Jebusites are. Who those people are. You know. So one way or another, you're not gonna just the average person is not gonna be able to pick up a Bible and just read through the whole thing and understand everything. One way or another, no matter what, there's gonna be things you have to look up, and other things that you won't understand. Okay. And then again, and also he's not talking about how. Remember that colonnade parbar thing? What is a colonnade? Colonnade is actually more confusing, right? So it's not true. What he's saying is simply not true.
Said it before and I will say it again. I care less what translation of the Bible you read as much as I care that you're reading it. Now, the caveat...
See? It's like, that's why they're just like, oh yeah, pick any one of these 10 that are pretty good. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to come back to us because we are the ones who speak Greek and Hebrew and you guys don't know, so you're stuck. One way or another, come back to... Only scholars like him really understand the Bible. You can pick one of these 10 and they're pretty good and, go ahead and read them. But when you get confused, come talk to me and, I'll be waiting here to be your guide.
To that is that not all Bible translations are created equally. There are good translations, there are bad translations, and there are, of course, heretical Bible translations. And the King James Version of the Bible is neither the most accurate nor the best translation in our...
He hasn't shown that here. If you believe his opinion, now again, most people are going to listen to this video, and they're going to say, yeah, Wes is a scholar, or he's on his way to being a scholar, or whatever. He's a well-educated Christian man. And so I'm going to trust Wes when he says that the King James is not the best translation. But if you look into the details of what he told you here, just off of what he told you here, you'll find that he's quite wrong. And I'm not saying that I've proven that King James is the best translation based on this video, but I've shown that the translation he recommends is not better. It's actually worse, and that's, in my experience, that's been the case. And I've studied this issue for many years now, like more than 10 years now. And I'm not a PhD student. I'm a master's student. So maybe, I don't know, but again, I don't think I need to be an expert to show, and I've already shown that he's quite wrong about many things that he stated in this video. So you don't need to be a scholar to know that he's wrong, and anyone can watch this video and understand that he's wrong. He's wrong about the things he's already said. So what else is he wrong about? Is he wrong about the idea that the King James cannot possibly be perfect Bible from God? I think he's wrong about that too. If we understand that God has revealed the Bible to us, that it's not up to human beings using our imperfect human reason and our corrupt, sinful minds to figure out the original words of the Bible. That's not up to us. No. What is up to us is to believe the Bible. And that's because God has given it to us, revealed it to us in its perfect form in the King James. And for people who speak other languages, I would suggest to you to read a Bible in your language, which is based largely on the King James. They should translate from the Greek and Hebrew, but where they have difficulties, they should consult the King James. And some Bible translators do that. And there's a copy of the Reina Valera which does that. The Spanish Bible, and there's other Bibles that do stuff like that, because the King James is correct, my opinion again, but I think there's very good reason to believe that. Again, God has revealed the Bible to us. Okay, it's not something that we go back and figure out with our reason, because our reason is sinful. We are imperfect, sinful beings. We can't come up with a perfect Bible, but God can, and He has with the King James. There's many reasons to believe that. I'll make another video about that. But anyway, I just wanted to respond to this video.
Day and age. By all means, read it. But there are very good reasons why, if you ask me to recommend a Bible translation, I will probably not recommend the King James to you. And it has everything to do with the fact that I want you to understand what you're reading in the most accurate and legible English you can access.
Again, ESV or whatever he recommends is not more accurate, as we've seen, and also not more intelligible. Because colonnade, first of all, I don't know what colonnade means. And when I look it up, it means like a row of trees or a row of columns. Is that what they're talking about in 2 Kings 26:18? I don't think it is. I don't think it is. Maybe Wes knows better than me. But I doubt it.
Yes. The King James Version of the Bible is not written in the 21st century English we speak. It's not entirely unintelligible, that's very true, but it is sufficiently unintelligible in places where the question, should this or that be updated, changed, or made more legible, is a genuine and legitimate question. The KJV translators were not wrong to use these words, and we are not dumb for misunderstanding them. It is not your job to try to...
So now he's talking about those words that had a different meaning for King James people and a different meaning today, such as halt, which he was using. And we talked about that, how that's not that his argument there is not really valid either. And that's just something that Mark Ward focuses on, another scholar who, as I was saying, he's similar to Wesley. They'll you start debating them in the comment section of their videos. And then when they hit the wall, they just run away. Because they don't really, they have not really looked in depth or thought about it on a deep philosophical or theological level. They just look at it surface level, it seems wrong. And Mark Ward, he studied it in depth, somewhat in depth. But again, they're not going to go really in depth. Because once you really go in depth, then the questions become it's very difficult. But then you have to kind of question a lot of the things. A lot of the things from modern biblical scholarship, and a lot of the stuff is not adding up. That's why scholars are in many ways nowadays, they're kind of taking away, I think, from our proper understanding of the Bible, and they're making it more confusing. And they're also, anyway, I don't want to go into everything, but there's a lot of problems with modern scholarship, especially modern scholarship of the Bible.
Pace with all the changes in the English language over the last 500 years in order to simply read your Bible, understand it.
See, this 500 years again? Why do you keep saying 500 years, Wes? I mean, most people, if it's 420 years, let's say, right? It's 411 years since the King James was translated or published. Most people would round that down to 400 if you're going to do a round figure. Or they just say 411, or they'll say roughly 400 years, or for whatever, or over. You know what? A lot of people say over 400 years. They'd say, and that's legit. But 500 years, you're just purposely doing that, so it seems like more. He wants like every inch he can get out of it, every inch to make it seem a little bit more discredit the King James a little bit more. He's gonna use it every little thing he can. Because they don't have legit arguments. They don't have real good arguments to go against the King James. So they have to come up with these kind of weak arguments and then try to make them as strong as they possibly can, but they're not strong. They're not strong at all.
And apply it to your life effectively. Once again, it is more important that you read your Bible than what translation you are necessarily reading. And if you're interested in the complexities of this particular topic, 2 books I would recommend on this subject are Mark Ward's Authorized, The Use and Misuse of the King James Bible, and James White's The King James Only.
Look, Mark Ward, I respect his argument. I respect his kind of approach. Because he's very much more respectful of the people who love the King James and whatnot, and he's trying to do. I think he's trying to do a good job with it, and I think he's being very honest much more than I think Wesley's being in this video. This other guy, James White. I mean, look, this book is more than 20 years old. It's a thin paperback. It's very weak. All the arguments in it are very weak. It's ludicrous. And these people, this guy James White, he's not even a real scholar, or he's like, I don't know, like I guess they call him a scholar or whatever. He did not. He got his PhD. He didn't even get a PhD. He has a Doctor of Ministry. Okay, so he doesn't have a PhD in Greek or Hebrew or biblical languages or anything like that. He has a Doctor of Ministry, and it's not from an accredited institution. Okay, but he's treated as if he's some scholar, and even at my school, or the same school Wesley went for his MDiv, Tyndale, they recommended this book, or not? They didn't recommend it, but it's in the book that we took biblical. There's a book that they give you for biblical interpretation. That text, right? I don't know if they have it. If I have it here. Anyway, I don't have it here, but in the book that they recommended for biblical interpretation, or the one that we used for that course, it says to read this book, James White's book, on this controversy, so you can understand it. So, well, I read the book, and it's terrible. It's terrible, and these people, they don't make good arguments. Again, it's just like the arguments Wesley's making here. They're very surface level. They're very superficial, and it's the kind of argument that you can make it if the person doesn't have the qualifications or the knowledge to go and look it up and understand that you're wrong. But I understand that they're wrong, and so now I've looked it up. They're wrong, and now I hope you can understand a little bit by watching this video that he is wrong. And if you have any questions, put them in the comments, and we can continue the discussion. This is a very complex area, but I think it's simple enough to understand one thing: that God reveals the Bible to us. We don't figure out what the Bible said with our sinful minds, because the heart of man is deceitful, or is desperately wicked. Okay, and we can't rely on our own minds and our own reason to determine the Word of God, because we'll always have our sinful minds will always be distracted and taken away from the truth. Okay, so we have to rely on God, and God has given us a beautiful thing with the King James. If you understand. There's other things to understand about it too, like how amazing it is in terms of its own literary sophistication of it, and the beauty of it is something almost supernatural. I would say it's supernatural in itself. Like they try to say that Shakespeare is on the same level as the King James, right? The complete works of Shakespeare, and then Shakespeare absolutely dwarfs everybody else in the English language. So it's kind of like, okay, well, they have at least one guy. There's at least one guy who's up on the same level as the King James. At least there's one human being who could produce a book or set of books that's comparable in terms of literary sophistication and beauty to the King James Bible. And they used to say that Shakespeare was part of the translation. Because they couldn't understand how this book became so beautiful. A translation from two ancient dead languages to become the most beautiful book ever written in English. How could that be? Not only that, the translators, they were mediocre writers themselves. None of them are necessarily very good writers. So people used to say that Shakespeare must have been in on it. But now, of course, they know that's not true. And now people who are honest about it, they know that Shakespeare probably didn't even write all that stuff. It's just impossible that he could have written that stuff. But they have to put Shakespeare up there, because they need to have at least one person to say that at least one person wrote a book as beautiful as the King James. Otherwise, they'll have to admit that the King James is supernatural. Because there's nothing that's not a human could write a book, right? And if no human could ever write a book as beautiful as the King James, then it must be from God. And the thing about the King James is that they try to say that Shakespeare is on the same level. The complete works of Shakespeare is comparable to the King James Bible in terms of literary beauty and sophistication. But the truth is, if you really understand like literary criticism and stuff, no, it's not even close. The King James is so far beyond Shakespeare. It's as if it's like comparing a painting of the sunset. Shakespeare is the painting of the sunset. And the King James Bible is an actual sunset. The beauty of an actual sunset compared to a painting of a sunset. I don't care how good your painter is. The actual sunset is 1,000,000 times more beautiful than that. Okay? And that's the difference between the King James and Shakespeare. But, you know, modern literary criticism is... They're almost as bad as these biblical scholars, unfortunately, you know? But that's how it goes.
Controversy. Likewise, if you want to learn more about these types of things, theology, biblical and church history, and all other things Christian worldview, then why don't you hit that subscribe button, check out some of the other videos and content on my
Hit that
channel.
subscribe button. See, I hate when people do that. Like, hit the subscribe button and then they don't put the card. You can put the card, Wes. You know, you don't have to edit the video or anything. It's just like, or you edit the video. You don't have to like do it before you put the video in. I'm pretty sure you can put it afterward. Anyway,
While you're at it.
hit the subscribe, like and subscribe, guys. Like and subscribe. Wesley Huff, teach, read, encourage. Yeah, well, I'm glad that you're trying to teach, reach, and encourage and equip Wes, but you're not doing a great job right now. But yeah, this is James White. This is the guy. He wrote that book. And yeah, apparently he's got a ton of stuff here. Yeah, so you got this. THM. I guess that's still kind of Masters of Theology. THD. Is that a Doctorate of Theology? I don't know what that is. But anyway. And a D-Min from Columbia. But he doesn't have any advanced degrees in Greek or Hebrew. I guess he has a minor. He has a BA in Bible with a minor in Greek from Grand Canyon University. Okay. And he teaches at some kind of campus, Arizona. Oh, he teaches at Baptist Theological Seminary, which is also probably not accredited. But anyway, so yeah, he went to this school, Columbia Evangelical Seminary, and it's not accredited. Some online degree mill, maybe? I don't know. Maybe they're alright. I was looking at their website too. Maybe this is it. Oh, this is their website. But yeah, so I guess maybe he's a faculty mentor there. But anyway, if you go on his Wikipedia, it says theologian. It says he's a theologian. Well, that's not what a theologian is, bro. I mean, as far as when I think of what is a theologian, I don't think of some guy who got a degree in a D-Min. See, look at this. James White Theologian. So his Wikipedia says this. Now I'm sure he's well aware that he is a Wikipedia. So and also he's well aware that he can edit this and fix this, and so it doesn't say theologian. But he leaves that here, so people think that he's a theologian. But when I think about what is a theologian, I usually think of somebody who has a PhD in theology, and usually I would expect that person probably teaches theology at a university or something. If you just got your PhD and then you went off and were doing something else, like writing books or whatever, I would not consider you a theologian. Now maybe some people would. I don't know. Maybe that's okay. I guess if you write a ton of books and people really like your stuff, maybe that's okay. Other theologians read it and consider it to be very, very scholarly and very applicable at their level of discussion. Then okay, I guess you're a theologian. Is James White a theologian based on those things? No, he's not. He has a THD. I guess THD. What is a THD? What is this? Doctor of Theology. So he has a doctor in theology. Okay, fine, whatever. Yeah. Doctor of Sacred Theology. But it's also from one of these, from this place, like this unaccredited school. Okay? And then he has this whole defense of why he went to an unaccredited school, but we should still consider him just as qualified as anybody else. But I would say that no, you should not do that. So he has this whole write-up about why it's called Of Doctorates and Eternity. You know, on his website, Alpha and Omega Ministries, you can go there and read about why his degree is just as good as the guy who went to an accredited school. So I have to read this whole thing. This is a little booklet basically. THD or PhD, okay. I chose the Doctor of Theology program, THM, THD, versus the Doctor of Philosophy degree. There's nothing whatsoever wrong with getting a PhD as a Christian. I chose to pursue the THD so that there would be nothing ambiguous about my course of studies. What? What? Nothing ambiguous about it. Now it's ambiguous. Now you have to write this whole thing about it. If it wasn't, if you had a PhD in theology, then everyone would know what it is. Okay? But when he gets the THD, then he has to write this thing. So that's ambiguous. You have created ambiguity by taking that degree. But anyway. Yeah, they get their PhDs from secular schools and then move into Christian education. THD was becoming an endangered species. Why? So, because they want to cross over into secular education. THD isn't going to get you hired at the local state university, but a PhD can. While there's nothing wrong with pursuing the PhD, I would say there's everything wrong with Christian education seeking to cross over and find acceptance within the secular world. There's a fundamental dichotomy between the ultimate goals of God-centered education and man-centered education. And the more faithful we are to taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ in our lives. So he's saying that his degree is more holy and good and more Christian than some guy who got a PhD in theology. Yeah, so he never got a PhD in theology. He got a Doctor of Theology, which is from an unaccredited institution. But we're supposed to understand that his is actually better. His is actually better than a PhD in theology because it's more godly. Because some of the people that got PhDs in theology want to cross over into secular education. Well, I mean, going to a secular school doesn't mean that you're teaching in some secular way or whatever. They're still teaching theology. I don't know. What's the difference? So what exactly is the difference? He doesn't really explain here. I guess it's like they're coming from, it's more God-centered or something, I guess. That's what he's trying to say. And not man-centered. But the truth is, his whole philosophy is man-centered. That's why he supports these new Bibles over the King James. Because they don't believe that God would reveal a perfect Bible to us, that they think that their human reason can determine the original text of the Bible. That's man-centered. Okay? So although he claims to be God-centered, he's more man-centered than half of these guys. You know? But anyway, that's how they are. You should listen to these guys talk. It's just shameful, some of the stuff they say. James White, people like him. And they're Calvinists too, so it's even worse. They teach that nonsense. So, yeah, that's what, anyway. that video was a bit long, I guess. So sorry about that, but that's why you should not necessarily take Wesley Huff's advice about Bible versions seriously. And Wes, if you do ever get a chance to watch this video, I do hope you'll respond to me about my perfectly valid question about why you're saying that about the King James translators. I don't know where it says that, what he said. And also, you did present some passages you thought were bad translations or something like that from the King James, and I was explaining why they are not in your video, in the comments in your video. So I'd appreciate a response on those as well if you do get a chance. But yeah, thanks very much, and thank you for watching Toronto Bible Study. Hallelujah.